A chocolate bar is one of the happiest foods on earth, being eaten by everyone to either cheer them up or used as a simple treat for the senses. But chocolate has a much darker history than the candy aisle would suggest, because behind that sweet chocolate bar is a story involving conquest, slavery, exploitation, and billions of dollars that spanned over centuries. Long before the Hershey chocolate bar even existed, was a completely different world when it comes to chocolate. The cacao tree originated in ancient Mesoamerican civilizations where cacao was valued enormously. But they didn't eat chocolate bars, they turned the cacao beans into a bitter drink, often mixed with spices and other ingredients. Kind of like hot chocolate without the hot part, and the flavor that you're used to today. And cacao wasn't just used as food. The American natives used it for a large number of purposes, like in ceremonies, medicine, and even as a form of currency, which is why this bean, just like today, had an immense value to its consumers. But then the Europeans arrived, changing everything. The Spanish were the first group to encounter and bring back cacao to the motherland. But there was a problem. Europeans didn't like the bitter taste. So they started adding sugar, completely transforming chocolate from its original form. And chocolate went from a bitter ceremonial drink into something much sweeter. And as European demand grew for chocolate, so did the demand for cacao, leaving the world with a problem, being that cacao is infamously difficult to raise and process. And, of course, someone has to do all the work to meet the demand. So cacao and sugar plantations were quickly expanded all through Central and South America by their colonizers, making sugar and cacao extremely profitable crops. Which is why the labor that goes into growing and maintaining these plants is extremely brutal, and Europeans figured that they need to source the laborers from somewhere else, leading to enslaved Africans being forcibly transported to plantations throughout the Atlantic and made them work under horrific conditions. But chocolate and sugar weren't the only products tied to this system. Coffee, tobacco, and other commodities were also cared for by the enslaved Africans. But of all those resources, chocolate's popularity kept growing, and eventually big change was coming to the world with the Industrial Revolution just upon the horizon, ready to reinvent the production of everything in the world, including chocolate. And with machines processing cacao much more efficiently, chocolate could now be produced on a massive scale. And suddenly, something that was once a luxury for the wealthy could now be bought by the average person all over the world. So by the 1800s, companies began to develop the idea of the modern chocolate bar. Factories began making enormous quantities of milk chocolate, giving you a much more sweeter and more accessible product than basic chocolate that was previously consumed only by the wealthy. Advertising also began to help chocolate reach everyone's eyes, and this was the beginning where chocolate became the food we recognize today, with the simple chocolate bar. But the thing about that is that even though chocolate became much more accessible, it doesn't mean that everyone was having a taste of this benefit, because even though slavery was beginning to be eliminated at this point, the people growing cacao remained vulnerable to extreme poverty and exploitation, because that problem didn't disappear. Today, most of the world's cacao comes from West Africa, from countries like the Ivory Coast and Ghana. Millions of farmers depend on cacao for their livelihoods, but recently, there has been documentation for a much darker side to the mass production of chocolate. Investigations over the years have documented child labor and other abusive working conditions within parts of the cacao supply chain. They routinely perform dangerous tasks such as clearing forests with chainsaws, harvesting pods with sharp machetes, carrying heavy loads exceeding 100 pounds, and spraying toxic agricultural chemicals without protective gear, often missing school and suffering severe physical harm. But that doesn't mean that every chocolate bar is produced with child labor, but it does mean that the supply chain behind chocolate is far more complicated than the packaging makes it look like, because you see a chocolate bar, but behind it could be farmers, traders, factories, shipping companies, and enormous multinational corporations. And that's what makes chocolate's history so strange. The product we associate with love and comfort has a history connected to some of the ugliest parts of global trade. Cacao used to be treated as a currency and was a very valuable resource to the ancient American civilizations. But with the colonization of the Americas, it kickstarted the lead up to the modern struggle for ethical cacao production. Because chocolate didn't simply become popular, it became an entire global industry. So next time you unwrap a chocolate bar, remember, you're not just eating candy, you're eating the end of a story that started thousands of years ago.